Dolores called 911 on me for mowing my lawn with a manual push mower at 6:17 a.m. So I got the city to reroute garbage trucks past her bedroom window every morning at 6:15. The cold metal handcuffs snapped around my wrists while I stood there in pajama pants, my coffee still steaming on the porch railing. Two police officers looked as embarrassed as I felt confused, staring at my weapon of mass destruction, a basic push mower that makes less noise than a blender. "Ma'am reported construction equipment disturbing the peace," Officer Martinez explained, gesturing at my human-powered lawn care device like it was a jackhammer. The absurdity was so complete it felt like living inside a satirical news story about suburban warfare gone wrong. But here's what made my blood boil. My disabled Vietnam veteran father had just moved in with us. He needed that yard maintained for wheelchair access. Dolores knew this, watched him navigate our sidewalk every day, and still called the cops on his son for cutting grass. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever dealt with an HOA Karen this unhinged? My name is Marcus, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest problem was working 72-hour shifts as an EMT just to afford our mortgage in Willowbrook Estates. My wife Patricia works nights as a hospital nurse. We're like ships passing in the hallway, leaving each other coffee and post-it note love letters because we're too exhausted for actual conversation. Then my father Raymond moved in with us. 72 years old, Vietnam veteran, lost his leg to diabetes. The metallic click of his wheelchair locks engaging every morning at 6 a.m. became our new alarm clock. We converted the garage into an accessible apartment complete with ramps and grab bars that still smell like fresh paint and determination. Willowbrook used to be paradise for working families. Built in 1995, filled with people who actually knew each other's names. The sound of kids' bikes clattering down sidewalks mixed with the distant hum of lawnmowers on Saturday mornings. Neighbors borrowed tools and returned them cleaner than when they got them. The whole place had this comforting smell of barbecue smoke and fresh-cut grass that meant home. Then Dolores Pemberton moved in like a perfectly manicured tornado. Picture a real estate agent who treats life like a property listing she needs to control. 54, drives a white BMW with vanity plates that scream, "I peaked in 2003. Always dressed for a board meeting even when she's measuring your grass with a ruler, which she actually does. The woman carries a measuring tape in her purse like normal people carry breath mints. Within 6 months of arriving from the upscale Riverside Heights development, she'd gotten herself elected HOA president with exactly 23 votes. How? Because most of us were too busy working double shifts to attend a meeting we didn't know was happening. Classic stealth takeover. Corporate America would be proud. The trouble started with Ray's wheelchair leaving tiny tire tracks on the sidewalk after rain. Barely visible marks that disappear after one sunny day, but Dolores issued us a violation notice demanding $300 for damage to common area concrete, plus a written promise to control wheelchair usage. I held that violation notice, feeling the expensive letterhead paper with edges sharp enough to draw blood, and realized this woman wanted me to tell my Vietnam veteran father to limit his mobility because it might scuff her precious sidewalk. The sheer audacity hit me like a physical force. The texture of entitlement made into paper form. When I filed for a medical accommodation, following proper procedures like a civilized human being, she responded with a lawyer's letter threatening property liens. Suddenly, the gentle hum of Ray's oxygen concentrator through our thin garage walls sounded less like medical equipment and more like a countdown timer to financial destruction. That's when the pattern became crystal clear. Dolores was systematically targeting anyone who didn't fit her suburban fantasy. Elderly widow Ethel got cited for a non-conforming mailbox color because 20 years of Florida sun had faded her red mailbox to a slightly different shade of red. A young couple with twin toddlers received a noise complaint for children playing in their own backyard at 4 p.m. on a Saturday. 3 families with work trucks got violation notices for commercial vehicles parked in their own driveways. She called us legacy neighbors, and the way she said it made legacy sound like a communicable disease that might lower property values. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Patricia was reheating leftover casserole at 5:45 a.m. because she'd missed another family dinner. I watched my father methodically sort his daily medications at our kitchen table. 23 pills arranged in precise rows, each one representing a piece of his body that didn't work anymore. The smell of reheated cheese and pharmaceutical bottles created this depressing breakfast atmosphere that felt like surrender. But Ray looked up at me with eyes that had seen actual combat and said, "Son, I didn't survive the Mekong Delta to let some suburban dictator tell me where I can roll my wheelchair." That's when I knew we weren't backing down. But I had no idea Dolores was about to escalate this from petty harassment to calling 911 on a man cutting his own grass. 2 weeks after the wheelchair incident, I walked out to my EMT van at 6 a.m. and found a bright yellow violation notice zip-tied to the door handle. The plastic cut into the metal with that distinctive sharp snap that instantly ruins your morning coffee mood. Violation, emergency vehicle access obstruction, fine, $150. Immediate towing authorized for repeat offense. I stood there in scrubs that still reeked of hospital disinfectant and someone else's emergency, reading this notice like it was written in ancient hieroglyphics. My clearly marked EMT van, complete with emergency medical decals that literally save lives, was now apparently a parking violation. Here's what made my blood pressure spike into cardiac arrest territory. I'd measured my parking that morning before my shift, 19 inches from the curb. When you're an EMT, precision can mean the difference between life and death, so I tend to be pretty damn accurate about measurements. But Dolores had conjured up a new rule overnight: 18 inches clearance for emergency vehicle access. The violation photo timestamp showed she'd been stalking my van at 2:47 a.m. while I was inside the hospital performing CPR on a heart attack patient. This woman was literally patrolling the neighborhood in the middle of the night like some suburban vampire with a measuring tape addiction. That's when I remembered something from my EMT training about municipal codes. We'd learned that local fire departments set emergency access standards, not random HOA presidents with too much time and spite. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I looked up the actual city fire code. Want to know what real firefighters need for emergency vehicle access? 12 inches, not 18. 12. Dolores had not only invented a number out of thin air, she'd made it more restrictive than what actual life-saving professionals require. I'd stumbled onto something my instructor had warned us about. HOA rules can't legally override municipal ordinances, but most people don't know that. Time to channel my inner detective. I spent my next day off walking the neighborhood with a measuring tape, documenting every vehicle like I was collecting evidence for a federal case. The morning dew soaked through my sneakers as I crouched beside Joe the plumber's work van, 17 inches from curb. The electrician's truck parked outside the Henderson house, 16 inches. 3 other work vehicles, all under Dolores's magical 18-inch requirement. But here's where it got delicious. Dolores's own pristine BMW sat crooked as a politician's smile, exactly 14 inches from the curb after her Tuesday night wine club meeting. The woman couldn't park straight if her life depended on it, yet she was citing professional tradespeople for imaginary violations. The selective enforcement pattern was more obvious than a heart attack on an EKG. Only work trucks got violations. Only people who actually used their vehicles to earn honest livings. Meanwhile, Princess Dolores parked however she pleased with 0 consequences. I filed a formal appeal with documentation that would make a prosecutor weep tears of joy. Fire department emails confirming the 12-inch requirement, photos showing the discriminatory enforcement pattern. And then I remembered something else from my hospital's HR training about ADA compliance. Restrictions on medical equipment delivery could violate federal disability law. One phone call to Sandra at the county ADA office changed everything. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice sharp with interest. "Restricting medical supply vehicle access for disabled residents raises serious federal compliance issues. Do you have documentation of this enforcement pattern?" My folder was thicker than a medical textbook and twice as damaging. The HOA board meeting felt like a courtroom drama directed by someone with a twisted sense of justice. I presented my evidence while Dolores sat rigid as a department store mannequin, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table. The sound echoed through the community center like tiny hammers of impending bureaucratic doom, mixing with the smell of burnt coffee and her expensive perfume, eau de defeat, with notes of panic sweat. When I read the fire department's email aloud, essentially stating that Dolores's rule was unnecessary and could actually impede emergency response, board member Janet's face went through more expressions than a soap opera actor. She looked at the evidence, then at Dolores, then back at the evidence like she was watching a tennis match where one player was clearly cheating. "So you're telling us," Janet said slowly, "that we've been enforcing a rule stricter than what actual firefighters need, and it potentially violates federal disability law? That appears to be exactly what happened, I replied, keeping my voice steady as a flatline monitor. The vote was 4-2 in my favor. Victory tasted like hospital coffee mixed with pure vindication. But Dolores's reaction was theatrical gold. Picture someone watching their house of cards collapse in a windstorm, except the cards were made of concentrated spite and bad legal advice. She gathered her papers with movements sharp enough to perform surgery and delivered her exit line with all the drama of a soap opera villain. Enhanced enforcement procedures will be necessary for residents who clearly don't understand community standards. Enhanced enforcement. Those words hung in the air like a medical emergency you know is coming but can't prevent. Enhanced enforcement turned out to be Dolores speak for, "I'm about to weaponize a ruler against your sanity." 3 days after my parking victory, another violation notice appeared like a yellow plague on my door. This time, she'd targeted my lawn with the precision of a sniper. According to her measurements, my grass was 3.2 inches tall, violating her newly minted rule requiring 2.5 to 3 inches maintained weekly. The fine escalated from $75 for first offense to $200 for second, plus mandatory professional landscaping for a third violation, because nothing says community spirit like forcing working families into expensive contracts they can't afford. What made this particularly infuriating was the timing. I work 72-hour hospital shifts while Patricia covers night rotations, leaving us maybe 6 conscious hours per week when it's not raining and we're both awake enough to operate machinery. Dolores knew our impossible schedule because she'd been watching us like a suburban surveillance specialist, probably taking notes on when we left for work and when we collapsed into bed. But I'm a stubborn EMT who learned long ago that bullies only understand one language, their own rules thrown back at them with surgical precision. So I grabbed my ruler and phone camera to conduct my own neighborhood grass survey, documenting evidence like I was investigating a medical malpractice case. The morning dew soaked through my sneakers as I crouched beside lawn after lawn, measuring blade heights with forensic accuracy. Dolores's own pristine yard measured 4.1 inches, her wealthy neighbor's retirement paradise stretched to 3.8 inches, and the elderly couple's professionally maintained lawn stood at 3.6 inches. Yet somehow only working families received violations. The plumber, electrician, nurse, and EMT all cited for grass barely taller than regulation, while the leisure class enjoyed immunity from their own rules. The selective enforcement pattern was more obvious than a flat line on a heart monitor, so I decided to fight back with malicious compliance that would make a military drill sergeant proud. I remembered from EMT training that when dealing with repeat offenders, documentation becomes your most powerful weapon. I created a spreadsheet tracking every violation, measurement, and timestamp, then implemented a strategy so perfectly within the rules it would drive Dolores absolutely insane. Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., the earliest legal hour according to city noise ordinances I'd memorized like medical protocols, I wheeled out my manual push mower and cut my grass to precisely 2.75 inches, right in the sweet spot of her arbitrary requirements. I documented each session with timestamp photos and maintained logs detailed enough to satisfy a federal audit, mailing copies to every board member with polite notes about ensuring strict compliance with neighborhood regulations. The sound of manual mower blades cutting through dew-heavy grass became my morning meditation, a Zen routine that happened to drive my nemesis crazy while the smell of fresh-cut lawn mixed with brewing coffee from neighboring kitchens created this perfect suburban symphony of justified rebellion. The community response exceeded my wildest hopes as Joe the plumber offered free services to anyone who fights Dolores with spreadsheets, while Ethel started baking cookies for our strategy meetings and sharing 40 years of neighborhood history that painted a picture of actual community before the reign of terror began. The young parents coordinated babysitting exchanges so they could attend board meetings without hiring sitters, and together we discovered that Dolores was literally advertising strict HOA maintains property values in her real estate listings, turning our harassment into her marketing strategy. During one of my precision mowing sessions, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Dolores stood at her bedroom window with what looked like a stopwatch, timing my lawn maintenance like an Olympic judge searching for technicalities. She'd been asking city code enforcement-pointed questions about noise ordinances, studying my routine with the intensity of someone planning something much bigger than grass height violations. The way she watched, the notes she took, the phone calls I'd overheard through her open window, all the pieces pointed to an escalation that would make our previous battles look like playground disagreements. That's when I realized the truth that hit me like a defibrillator shock. Dolores wasn't satisfied with violation notices and measuring tapes anymore. She'd moved beyond petty harassment into something that could involve flashing lights, handcuffs, and a criminal record that would destroy my EMT license. The woman who'd started this war over wheelchair tracks was preparing a nuclear option that could end my career and devastate my family, all because I'd had the audacity to follow her own rules too perfectly. As I finished my methodical mowing pattern that Tuesday morning, watching her scribble notes while clutching that stopwatch, I knew with absolute certainty that my next battle with Dolores wouldn't be fought in board meetings or spreadsheets. It would happen at 6 a.m. with police sirens wailing and my neighbors watching through their windows as everything I'd worked for hung in the balance. The nuclear option arrived at exactly 6:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. 2 police cruisers pulled into our quiet street with lights flashing like we were hosting a crime scene instead of a suburban lawn care routine. I was halfway through my methodical mowing, still in pajama pants with my coffee mug sitting on the porch railing, when the cold metal handcuffs snapped around my wrists. "Sir, we received a 911 call about construction equipment operating before legal hours," Officer Martinez explained, looking about as embarrassed as a cop can look while restraining someone for grass cutting. The caller reported power tools and heavy machinery disturbing the peace. I gestured toward my basic manual push mower sitting innocently on the lawn. "Officer, that's human-powered. It makes less noise than my wife's coffee grinder." The absurdity hit me like a slap. I was being arrested for operating a device that required exactly 0 electricity, 0 gas, and 0 brain cells to operate safely. Dolores watched from her window, still clutching her phone like smoking gun evidence. She'd called 911, on me, for cutting grass, with a manual mower, at a perfectly legal hour. Here's where it gets beautiful, though. Officer Martinez continued explaining the complaint. "Ma'am claimed you were violating City Ordinance 47B about construction equipment before 7 a.m. The problem? I knew that ordinance from my EMT training. It applies to commercial construction sites, not homeowners maintaining their property. Residential lawn care is legal starting at 6 a.m. with appropriate equipment. Dolores had filed a false police report based on her complete misunderstanding of municipal law. And filing false police reports? That's a misdemeanor offense. But instead of backing down when the officer explained her mistake, Dolores doubled down with the determination of someone whose reality was crumbling in real time. "That mower sounds exactly like construction equipment," she insisted, her voice carrying across the neighborhood with the pitch of pure desperation. "The noise level clearly violates community standards." She was literally arguing that her personal interpretation should override actual law. It was like watching someone insist that gravity doesn't apply to them while falling off a cliff. My EMT training kicked in with methodical precision. I politely requested the police report number, Officer Martinez's badge number, and permission to record our interaction. One-party consent recording is legal in our state, and I had a feeling this documentation would become very important very soon. "This seems like a misunderstanding that should be thoroughly documented," I explained calmly, while internally calculating how false police reports might affect someone's real estate license. The irony was delicious. Dolores's own escalation was creating the evidence trail that could destroy her professionally. Within minutes, the neighborhood transformed into a witness protection program. Joe the plumber emerged with security camera footage showing me with the manual mower. Ethel appeared with a written statement about the timeline and actual noise levels. Apparently my mowing was quieter than her morning television. Sarah, the young mother, offered to testify that my grass cutting was less disruptive than her twins playing with blocks. The community solidarity felt warmer than hospital coffee and twice as satisfying. Dolores had finally pushed too far, and everyone could see it. Officer Martinez reviewed the witness statements while his partner documented the scene with obvious reluctance. You could smell the absurdity in the morning air. 2 trained police officers processing a crime scene involving a manual lawnmower and a woman who thought neighborhood rules superseded physics. "Between you and me," Officer Martinez said quietly as he removed the handcuffs, "we've been getting a lot of calls from this area lately. Most involve the same complainant reporting things that aren't actually violations." His words carried weight. Dolores's credibility with law enforcement was evaporating faster than morning dew. The officers released me with apologies and handed me a business card for the community liaison who handles neighbor disputes. We take false reports seriously when there's a pattern, the desk sergeant later explained when I filed my complaint about misuse of emergency services. Repeat offenders face escalating penalties, including potential criminal charges. As the police cars pulled away, neighbors returned to their routines with knowing looks and sympathetic waves. I stood in my driveway, still holding that business card, realizing this morning had fundamentally shifted everything. Dolores had crossed from petty harassment into potential criminal territory. She'd weaponized emergency services against a neighbor over manual lawn equipment, but in doing so, she'd also exposed herself completely, showing everyone exactly how far she was willing to go to maintain control of her little kingdom. The taste of that realization was bitter and sweet simultaneously. Sweet because I'd survived her nuclear option with my reputation intact and community support stronger than ever. Bitter because I now knew there was literally no line Dolores wouldn't cross in her quest for suburban domination. As I picked up my coffee mug and wheeled the infamous manual mower back to the garage, one thought kept echoing through my mind. If calling 911 on grass cutting was her nuclear option, what would she do when she realized it had backfired spectacularly? I had a feeling I was about to find out. 3 days after the handcuff incident, I decided to fight bureaucracy with bureaucracy. During my lunch break at the hospital, I drove to the county courthouse to research the original HOA documents. If Dolores wanted to play legal games, I was going to learn the actual rules instead of her made-up version. The basement records room smelled like old paper and forgotten dreams. A bored clerk directed me to the filing cabinets containing Willowbrook Estates HOA documents dating back to 1995. I pulled out the original charter and bylaws, yellowed with age but legally binding as the day they were signed. What I discovered made my hands shake slightly as I held those papers. Every single rule Dolores had implemented, all 47 of her precious community standards, had never been properly voted on by residents. According to state law, any HOA rule changes affecting fines or restrictions require 60% resident approval through formal ballot. Dolores had bypassed this entirely by claiming her rules were clarifications of existing policies, not changes. But here's the smoking gun that made my EMT training and documentation pay off. The original 1995 bylaws specified a maximum fine of $25 for any violation. $25. Not the $75 to $300 penalties Dolores had been collecting. Every violation notice issued under her regime was legally invalid. I fed coins into the ancient copy machine, printing evidence of what could only be described as systematic fraud. The machine's mechanical grinding echoed through the empty basement like the sound of Dolores's empire crumbling one page at a time. Then I found the financial records that changed everything. County documents showed the HOA had collected $47,000 in violation fines since Dolores took over in 2019. $47,000 from families like ours, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and working parents who couldn't afford to fight back. Money that went into an account controlled solely by Dolores as president, despite original bylaws requiring treasurer co-signature for any expenditure over $500. I cross-referenced those collections with the receipts filed for HOA improvements. $15,000 for landscaping at Dolores's personal address. $8,000 for community signage installed exclusively around her property. $12,000 for legal consultation with her personal attorney about unrelated real estate transactions. The woman had been using our violation fines as her personal ATM. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "How's the research going?" I took a photo of the financial documents and typed back, "Found the nuclear codes." This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. This was embezzlement, wire fraud, violation of fiduciary duty, the kind of charges that don't just end HOA presidencies, they end real estate licenses, and sometimes involve orange jumpsuits. I remembered something from my hospital's compliance training about financial irregularities. When someone in authority systematically collects money based on invalid procedures, it becomes criminal fraud regardless of their intentions. Every family who'd paid those illegal fines had grounds for civil lawsuits, and the state attorney general's office takes HOA fraud very seriously. But the most beautiful part? Dolores had created this evidence trail herself through her obsessive documentation. Every violation notice, every fine collection, every expenditure was meticulously recorded in county files. She'd built her own legal destruction with the precision of someone who thought paperwork made theft legitimate. I spent 2 hours copying documents, organizing evidence, and researching state HOA oversight procedures. By the time I walked out of that courthouse, I wasn't just fighting for my family's right to cut grass in peace. I was sitting on evidence that could help 23 families recover thousands of dollars in illegally collected fines. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Dolores thought she was playing legal hardball with violation notices and 911 calls. She had no idea I'd just discovered she'd been committing felonies with a paper trail that would make prosecutors weep tears of joy. Time to gather some allies and plan the counteroffensive that would end this war permanently. That evening, I created a private Facebook group called Willowbrook Residents for Fair HOA and sent invitations to every family I'd seen getting violation notices. Within 6 hours, we had 28 members sharing stories that made my grass-cutting arrest look like a gentle warning shot. Ethel became our unofficial historian, arriving at my house the next day with a shoebox full of neighborhood memories. Before Dolores, she said, spreading photos across my kitchen table, we had block parties where kids played until dark and nobody measured anyone's mailbox with rulers. The pictures showed families barbecuing together, helping elderly neighbors with yard work, and actually enjoying their community instead of living in fear of citation notices. Joe the plumber took charge of outreach to tradespeople, and his network was impressive. Every contractor in 3 counties has Dolores stories, he said, scrolling through his phone contacts. The woman once tried to fine a roofer for parking his truck while fixing someone's storm damage during the actual storm. His laugh carried the bitter edge of someone who dealt with bureaucratic insanity professionally. Sarah, the young mother with journalism experience, volunteered to document everything and handle social media strategy. We need public pressure, she explained while organizing our growing pile of evidence. HOA presidents hate transparency more than vampires hate sunlight. She'd already started a neighborhood newsletter chronicling Dolores's overreach, complete with photos of her measuring grass with scientific precision at dawn. The legal strategy crystallized when I contacted the County Legal Aid Society. Attorney Rebecca Morgan agreed to a pro bono consultation after reviewing my courthouse discoveries. This is textbook HOA fraud, she said, examining the financial documents spread across her conference table. Dolores is personally liable for every illegally collected fine, plus statutory damages. We're talking about potential class action territory. Rebecca explained something that made my EMT brain light up with possibilities. HOA board recalls only require 25% of residents to call a special meeting. Most people think you need majority support, but that's for the actual vote. Getting the meeting is much easier than anyone realizes. You already have enough signatures based on your Facebook group membership, she said, sliding the recall petition template across the table. But I wanted more than just Dolores's removal. I wanted consequences that would prevent future HOA tyrants from terrorizing working families. That's when Rebecca mentioned the State Real Estate Commission complaint process. Real estate licenses require good standing with regulatory boards, she explained. Fraud complaints trigger automatic license reviews, and embezzlement convictions result in permanent revocation. The revenge planning got deliciously creative when I researched city services during my next day off. I'd remembered overhearing Dolores complain about garbage truck noise during a board meeting, so I contacted the traffic engineering department about route optimization. Current routes force trucks to make dangerous backing maneuvers, I explained to Engineer Williams, showing him a hand-drawn map of our neighborhood. A simple reroute would improve both safety and efficiency. Williams studied the proposal with professional interest. You're right about the visibility issues, he said, marking potential improvements on his official map. We can reroute pickup to flow past Riverside Drive for better traffic patterns. Riverside Drive was Dolores's street. The new route would send 3 different trucks, regular trash, recyclables, and yard waste, rumbling past her bedroom window starting at 6:15 a.m. daily. I didn't mention personal motivations, just presented legitimate safety concerns and efficiency improvements that happened to solve multiple problems simultaneously. Sometimes the universe provides perfect solutions disguised as municipal engineering. Our strategy meetings moved between houses to avoid attention, with Ethel's living room becoming command central because it had the largest table for spreading documents. The smell of her fresh cookies mixed with the intensity of families who'd finally found their voices after months of bureaucratic bullying. Kids played in the backyard while parents planned the most thorough HOA revolt in suburban history. We rehearsed key presentation points, anticipated Dolores's defensive responses, and prepared for every possible escalation. Joe installed security cameras at 3 targeted houses because we expected retaliation. Sarah practiced recording board meetings legally with proper notification procedures. I organized medical evidence about disability accommodation requirements that Dolores had violated. The timeline was set. Next monthly board meeting in 2 weeks, community center main room, maximum capacity 85 people. We had 73 confirmed attendees, the largest HOA meeting in Willowbrook history. Rebecca would attend as legal counsel, Sarah would document everything, and I would present the financial evidence that would end Dolores's reign permanently. But first I filed the city engineering request for garbage route optimization. Within a week, new pickup schedules were approved and implemented. Trucks began their 6:15 a.m. symphony past Dolores's house while I enjoyed my morning coffee from the porch, waving at drivers who'd become unwitting allies in suburban justice. The sound of diesel engines and hydraulic compactors echoing off her windows each morning felt like poetic justice with a municipal engineering soundtrack. Dolores called the city daily to complain, but Engineer Williams explained that routes were determined by efficiency studies and safety requirements, not resident preferences. Phase 1 of the counteroffensive was complete. Time for the main event. Dolores discovered our organizing efforts on a Thursday morning when she spotted Joe's security camera installation at the Henderson house. By Friday afternoon, she'd gone into full panic mode and called an emergency HOA board meeting with less than 24 hours notice. Only 2 of the 5 board members showed up because normal people don't drop everything for manufactured crises. But Dolores proceeded anyway with the determination of someone watching their empire crumble in real time. She passed what she called an emergency community safety rule banning coordinated resident complaints, with $500 fines for anyone participating in disruptive group activities. The rule was so vaguely written, it could theoretically ban neighborhood barbecues, book clubs, or parents coordinating carpools. But Dolores's real target was obvious. She wanted to criminalize our Facebook group and make organizing financially impossible for working families already struggling with her previous violation fees. The emergency meeting violated every state requirement for HOA governance. No 72-hour public notice, no quorum of board members, no resident input period. She'd essentially held a secret meeting with herself and called it official business, which would have been hilarious if it wasn't potentially bankrupting for anyone who dared to fight back against her tyrannical overreach. But Dolores's legal ignorance was becoming her greatest weakness. The emergency rule violated First Amendment protections for resident complaints and state HOA regulations requiring proper procedures for rule changes. I contacted our state HOA oversight board that same evening, filing a formal complaint about the illegal meeting and unconstitutional rule. The investigator who returned my call within 48 hours sounded genuinely excited about our case. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, "this is exactly the kind of systematic abuse our office was created to address. We'll need all HOA financial records for the past 3 years. Music to my ears, because those records would expose every penny of Dolores's embezzlement scheme while she was busy trying to silence the very people she'd been defrauding. Then came the retaliation blitz that proved Dolores had completely lost touch with reality. Over the next week, she issued 23 violation notices targeting anyone she suspected of joining our resistance movement. Joe got cited for his work truck exceeding height limits, despite being parked legally for 2 years. Ethel received a violation for mailbox paint with microscopic chips that required magnification to see. Sarah's twins got noise complaints for playing on their swing set at 3 in the afternoon. The pattern was so obviously retaliatory that even board members who'd previously stayed neutral started questioning Dolores's judgment. But I had learned something valuable from my EMT training about dealing with escalating patients. Sometimes the best response is strategic non-response. Instead of fighting each invalid violation individually, I documented every single one as additional evidence of bad faith enforcement and harassment. My spreadsheet of Dolores's violations had grown into a masterpiece of documented abuse that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. 23 families, 47 violations, all issued within days of our organizing efforts, with enforcement patterns so discriminatory they practically screamed lawsuit in 12-point font. Rebecca reviewed the evidence and confirmed what I'd suspected. We now had grounds for federal civil rights violations in addition to the financial fraud charges. Meanwhile, the city's new garbage route was working perfectly. 3 different trucks rumbled past Dolores's bedroom window each morning like clockwork. Regular trash at 6:15 a.m., recyclables at 6:22 a.m., and yard waste at 6:28 a.m. The diesel engines and hydraulic compactors created a symphony of municipal efficiency that happened to wake her up precisely when she'd been waking up the entire neighborhood with her violation photo sessions. She called the city engineering department daily, demanding route changes and filing noise complaints that went nowhere because the trucks operated within legal hours and followed approved efficiency patterns. Engineer Williams patiently explained that pickup schedules were determined by traffic studies and safety requirements, not individual preferences. While I enjoyed my morning coffee and waved at the drivers who'd become unwitting participants in perfectly legal revenge, the beautiful irony wasn't lost on anyone in our Facebook group. Dolores, who'd spent months measuring our lives with rulers and calling police about manual lawnmowers, was now experiencing the gentle justice of municipal services operating exactly as designed. No violations, no harassment, just efficient government operations that happened to occur outside her bedroom window during her beauty sleep. But I could see the mounting pressure taking its toll. Dolores's morning inspection walks became frantic patrols with measuring tape and camera, photographing violations that existed only in her increasingly desperate imagination. She'd started timing residents' activities with stopwatches, documenting children's playground usage, and measuring the exact angle of parked bicycles like someone whose grip on reality was slipping one ruler measurement at a time. The state investigator's call requesting immediate access to all HOA financial records was the final straw. Dolores realized that her emergency rule hadn't stopped our organizing. It had just provided more evidence of her authoritarian overreach while state officials prepared to audit every penny she'd illegally collected. Her next move would either be complete surrender or something so desperately stupid it would hand us total victory. I had a feeling desperate was her middle name. Desperation made Dolores dangerous in ways I hadn't anticipated. On Monday morning, every mailbox in the neighborhood contained professionally printed flyers with my photo and the headline, "Neighborhood Safety Alert, Resident Using Medical Authority to Target Elderly." The flyers included selective photos of my EMT van blocking emergency access and quotes claiming I was coordinating harassment campaigns against vulnerable residents, while exploiting my medical position to intimidate neighbors into joining disruptive activities. The character assassination was so expertly crafted it felt like political propaganda designed by someone who'd watched too many election attack ads. Dolores had transformed my attempts to help the community into a narrative where I was the villain preying on elderly residents and abusing medical authority for personal vendettas. She'd even included a photo of me helping her own neighbor during a medical emergency, cropped to make it look like I was harassing rather than providing life-saving care. But Dolores's desperation had created her biggest mistake yet. The photo she'd used as evidence of my intimidation actually came from my EMT body camera footage during a legitimate 911 response 3 weeks earlier. I'd helped her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, during a diabetic emergency, staying with her until family arrived and ensuring she received proper care. The full footage showed me providing compassionate medical assistance while my van was legally parked in response to an active emergency call. Mrs. Patterson was furious when she saw the flyer. "That young man saved my life," she told everyone who'd listen, "and this horrible woman is using my medical emergency to spread lies about him." She wrote an open letter defending my character and exposing Dolores's manipulation, which Ethel and Sarah helped distribute to every household along with copies of the actual incident report showing my professional conduct during the emergency response. The community backlash was swift and decisive. 12 more families joined our Facebook group after seeing Dolores's false accusations, bringing our membership to 43 households representing over half the neighborhood. Parents who'd stayed neutral suddenly realized that if Dolores would lie about an EMT helping elderly residents, she'd lie about anything to maintain her power over the community. Joe organized a neighborhood canvass to counteract the propaganda campaign, bringing copies of our evidence to residents who might have been swayed by Dolores's professional-looking flyers. "Anyone who knows Marcus knows these accusations are bullshit," he said, knocking on doors with the determination of someone whose own reputation had been targeted by similar lies. "But some folks only see the headline, so we need to make sure they see the truth too." Meanwhile, I maintained strategic patience while documenting every aspect of Dolores's defamation campaign. The flyers constituted written false statements distributed publicly to damage my reputation, which meant we now had grounds for libel charges in addition to all the other legal violations she'd accumulated. Rebecca confirmed that false accusations involving professional conduct could be especially damaging in defamation cases, particularly when they targeted medical credentials and community service. but the most satisfying development was watching Dolores's world collapse from multiple directions simultaneously. The state HOA investigator had frozen all association accounts pending audit results, cutting off her access to the embezzled funds she'd been using for personal expenses. Her real estate license review board opened a formal investigation after receiving detailed fraud complaints from 23 affected families. 3 potential clients canceled property listings when the license investigation became public record, destroying her income stream just as her legal bills started mounting. The garbage trucks continued their perfect morning symphony past her house, with Dolores now standing at her bedroom window each day at 6:15 a.m., like a defeated general watching enemy forces parade past her fortress. She'd call the city daily demanding route changes, but Engineer Williams had documented the efficiency improvements so thoroughly that her complaints only highlighted her inability to understand basic municipal operations. The irony was delicious. The woman who'd spent months waking up the neighborhood with her violation photo sessions was now losing sleep to the gentle rumble of properly scheduled waste management services. Her phone calls to city departments became increasingly unhinged as the investigation pressure mounted. Code enforcement reported that she'd called 17 times in 1 week demanding inspections of imaginary violations, while the police department logged multiple complaints about organized resident harassment that never materialized into actual evidence. Her credibility with municipal authorities evaporated completely when she filed noise complaints about children playing in daylight hours and demanded citations for bicycles parked at technically non-perpendicular angles. The breaking point came when Dolores scheduled a mandatory emergency board meeting for Friday evening, claiming serious neighborhood security issues require immediate resident attention. She'd invited local police to provide security during community safety discussions and distributed meeting notices warning about coordinated disruption attempts by certain residents. It was clear she planned to make her final stand by framing our organizing efforts as criminal activity requiring law enforcement intervention. But I realized this was exactly what we'd been waiting for, a public forum with official witnesses where Dolores would either surrender completely or destroy herself so thoroughly that even her remaining supporters would abandon ship. After months of fighting on her terms with measuring tapes and violation notices, we were finally going to settle this in front of the entire community with evidence that would end her reign permanently. Friday couldn't come fast enough. Friday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. The community center's main room buzzed with nervous energy as 73 residents filed in, the largest HOA meeting in Willowbrook history. Folding chairs squeaked against linoleum floors while the smell of burnt coffee from the ancient machine mixed with tension thick enough to require medical intervention. Dolores sat at the front table in her best business suit, flanked by her personal attorney and a stack of papers tall enough to build defensive fortifications. I entered with Raymond in his wheelchair, surrounded by Joe, Ethel, Sarah, and 24 families whose lives had been turned upside down by measuring tapes and manufactured violations. Rebecca sat in the back row with her legal pad and recording equipment, while Officer Martinez occupied a corner seat looking like he'd rather be handling actual crimes instead of suburban drama therapy sessions. The local newspaper reporter Sarah had contacted sat near the front with her camera ready, because public accountability requires public witnesses when petty tyrants finally face consequences for their actions. Dolores called the meeting to order with the authority of someone who still believed she controlled the narrative. We're here tonight to address coordinated harassment campaigns targeting longtime residents and HOA leadership, she announced, gesturing toward me like I was a war criminal rather than an EMT who'd committed the heinous crime of cutting grass at legal hours. Mr. Rodriguez has organized disruptive activities designed to undermine community standards and intimidate elderly neighbors into joining his campaign against proper neighborhood governance. Her voice carried across the packed room with the confidence of someone who'd convinced herself that repetition could transform lies into truth through sheer force of will. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 3 months' worth of documentation in my folder and the support of families who'd finally found their voices after months of bureaucratic terror. Thank you for this opportunity to address the community, I said, my EMT training keeping my voice steady as surgical steel. I'd like to present some facts about what's really been happening in our neighborhood. The projector screen lit up with the original 1995 HOA bylaws as I began dismantling Dolores's empire, one documented lie at a time. These are our actual governing documents filed with the county and legally binding since this community was established. Notice the maximum fine limit of $25 for any violation. The room erupted in murmurs as residents realized they'd been systematically overcharged for years. Every rule change affecting fines or restrictions requires 60% resident approval through formal ballot voting, I continued, displaying the state HOA regulations Dolores had ignored completely. The 47 new rules implemented since 2019 were never voted on by residents, making every violation notice issued under these policies legally invalid. You could hear people calculating refunds in their heads as the financial implications became crystal clear. But the real bombshell came when I displayed the county financial records showing $47,000 in illegally collected fines flowing into accounts controlled solely by Dolores. State law requires treasurer co-signature for expenditures over $500, I explained while projecting receipts for her personal landscaping and legal bills paid with community violation fees. This represents systematic embezzlement of funds collected through invalid procedures. The room went silent except for the sound of Dolores's attorney frantically scribbling notes while his client's face transformed through every stage of grief simultaneously. Elderly Ethel stood up with her walker and declared, "That woman stole $900 from me with fake violations while I'm living on Social Security." The community anger was palpable, electric, dangerous in the way that justice feels when it finally arrives after months of injustice. Joe stood next, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built half the neighborhood with his own hands. "Marcus helped my family when the city was giving us problems with permits. Meanwhile, this lady," he pointed at Dolores, "has been stealing from working families to pay for her personal lawn service." The applause was thunderous, sustained, cathartic. Sarah, the young mother, added, "My children couldn't play in their own backyard because of her noise complaints. Now we find out she's been committing fraud while terrorizing families with manufactured violations." More applause, building momentum like a freight train of community outrage finally finding its target. That's when the state HOA investigator stood up and identified herself to the stunned crowd. "I'm here to inform everyone that preliminary audit results show $31,000 in unauthorized expenditures and systematic violations of state HOA governance requirements. All association accounts have been frozen pending criminal investigation." Dolores's attorney tried to calm her down as she began shouting about coordinated attacks and disgruntled residents, but her words only made the legal situation worse while reporters documented every unhinged moment for public record. Officer Martinez stepped forward and addressed the harassment complaints filed by multiple residents, explaining that false police reports and stalking behavior could result in criminal charges while the community watched their former tormentor face real consequences for the first time. The formal vote on Dolores's immediate resignation was 71 in favor, 2 opposed. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes while she gathered her papers and stormed out, followed by her attorney who looked like he was already calculating billable hours for damage control. Justice had arrived with witnesses, documentation, and the sweet sound of democracy working exactly as designed. Dolores vanished from Willowbrook within 30 days like a bad fever finally breaking, her white BMW with realtor vanity plates disappearing forever, while the neighborhood exhaled collectively for the first time in years. The state investigation recovered $43,000 in stolen fines and fraudulent expenses, with every affected family receiving full refunds plus damages that helped heal the financial wounds her tyranny had inflicted on working families already struggling to make ends meet. The transformation felt like watching our community wake up from a nightmare. We elected a new HOA board with me as president and Ethel as secretary, immediately reducing Dolores's 47 arbitrary restrictions back to 12 sensible maintenance guidelines. Board meetings became monthly potlucks where the smell of homemade casseroles mixed with laughter and actual conversation, instead of fear and measuring tape anxiety. Maximum fines returned to the legal $25, financial reports became transparent, and families could finally maintain their homes without terror of citation notices for imaginary violations. Raymond's wheelchair access received permanent protection under our new disability accommodation policy, while my EMT van got explicit emergency services exemption. The crushing family stress evaporated like morning dew, giving Patricia normal work schedules and returning our dinner table conversations that had been casualties of Dolores's harassment campaign. Our house transformed from a fortress under siege into a home where neighbors actually wanted to visit. The legal consequences for Dolores were beautifully comprehensive. Permanent real estate license revocation ended her career. Criminal fraud conviction resulted in 2 years probation with community service, and restitution payments would follow her like a financial ghost of her own making. But the most satisfying justice was poetic. Those garbage trucks still rumble past her former house each morning, now occupied by a retired couple who appreciate efficient municipal services and wave cheerfully at the drivers. I still enjoy my 6:20 a.m. coffee ritual, maintaining lawn grass at precisely 2.75 inches with the same manual mower that started this war, except now neighbors stop by to chat instead of hiding behind curtains. The sound of children playing freely in yards, the sight of work trucks parked legally in driveways, and the smell of weekend barbecues have returned to create the community atmosphere that Dolores had tried to destroy with her suburban fascism. Our documentation system became a legal aid template helping other neighborhoods fight HOA abuse across 3 counties, while the state strengthened oversight laws based on Willowbrook evidence. We'd accidentally created a model for defeating petty dictators with measuring tapes and fraudulent authority, proving that ordinary families can triumph over bureaucratic bullies when they organize strategically and fight back with facts. The recovered funds created something magical. The $43,000 became seed money for community improvements that brought neighbors together in ways Dolores's divisive rules never could. We installed playground equipment for children she'd tried to silence, accessible sidewalk repairs for elderly and disabled residents, and a small park where families gather for potlucks that replaced her hostile interrogation sessions disguised as board meetings. Our annual Willowbrook Unity Festival celebrates the diversity and cooperation she'd attempted to crush, featuring food from every culture in our neighborhood, games for freely playing children, and storytelling from elderly residents about community spirit surviving attempted suburban tyranny. The festival's scholarship fund honors working families pursuing emergency services careers, with Raymond serving as honorary selection committee chairman because surviving both Vietnam and Dolores qualifies him as an expert on overcoming impossible odds. This crisis made me a better EMT by developing leadership skills that help patients and families navigate healthcare bureaucracy, while Patricia and I emerged stronger as a couple having survived external pressure that could have destroyed us. Raymond became the beloved neighborhood elder who shares military wisdom with young families while teaching chess on accessible picnic tables purchased with recovered violation funds. Our home evolved from a battleground into a gathering place for community organizing and mutual support, proving that resistance to petty tyranny creates lasting positive change when ordinary people decide they've endured enough harassment from measuring tape tyrants and manufactured authority figures. Looking back, Dolores accidentally did us the greatest favor by pushing so far that she exposed her true nature to everyone who mattered. Her attempted community destruction became the catalyst that made us stronger, more united, and more committed to protecting each other from future suburban dictators with rulers and fraudulent power fantasies. Your turn. Drop your most insane HOA nightmare story in the comments below because I read every single one and some of your experiences make mine look like a gentle disagreement over lawn height. Smash that subscribe button for HOA stories if you want more David versus Goliath battles where working families actually win. Because next week's episode involves a city council member who tried to shut down our Unity Festival and learned why you never mess with a neighborhood that's already survived one bureaucratic tyrant.
Thanks for watching HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen chaos and neighborhood showdowns every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story.